In this video, I would like to talk about petrodollar recycling. Petrodollar recycling is basically the mechanism that allows the US to dominate the world. Now, in order to understand how the US has become so powerful, it's important to understand the economic system. Now, the US dollar has a special position, a special privilege, in that it's the world reserve currency. What the fuck is that? Okay, which simply means that practically it means that all the oil, the petroleum that is sold, like for example in Saudi Arabia and other OPEC countries, must be sold in US dollar. And this goes back a while. If you want to know about the history, it started first with the Bretton Woods agreements after the Second World War, and the U.S. I mean, like Europe was devastated by the war, and so they sought the help of the U.S. and the U.S. Helped Europe by giving them huge loans. You know, the Marshall Plan, to rebuild their cities, and it was agreed in Bretton Woods that the US dollar would be the reserve currency. It meant that international trade would be done with US dollar. Why? Because the US dollar was in those times was connected to gold. So the US dollar had a gold standard, which meant that foreign banks, if they would the foreign banks had the ability to get gold from the US for their dollars, and that gave the US dollar a strong position, you know, a strong value. The other currencies were all fiat currencies, like the sterling and European currencies were all fiat currencies, which means that their value wasn't backed up by gold or something else or silver. It was just fiat. It was just, what the fuck? Sorry for the sounds here. Okay. So basically, that's what made gave the U.S. a great position. But the problem was that in the 70s, after the Vietnam War, that the U.S. Went into great debt. It made a lot of debt. You know, it borrowed from other countries in such amount that it became unsustainable, and that other countries wanted to pull back their gold. You know, from the U.S. central bank. Okay, so like the other countries were like panicking, like, oh my god, the US is going bankrupt, and now is our time to get our gold back from the US central bank, with the name of the Federal Reserve. So European countries started to ask for their gold, and at that time President Nixon was the president of the US, and he understood that it's not possible because they borrowed more than they had in their vaults of gold. So at that moment, Nixon made the decision to go off the gold standard. Just like all the other countries, they weren't on the gold standard. There was a time where every currency was backed by gold or silver, but that was like a phase that was departed a long time ago. Only the US dollar currency was backed by gold. And so President Nixon decided to go off the gold standard in the 70s. He did that in order to not to have to give gold to give gold back to the other countries. It was like a cop out. It was like, okay, we're not on the gold standard anymore, so you can't take gold away from us anymore. So it was like stealing, you know. But that's not the only, that's not like the only thing that happens. You know, if that would be only the case, the U.S. would lose its power because the U.S. dollar would be worthless. It would be also like fiat currency. It wouldn't have the same value. But what happened at the same time is that the U.S. and Saudi Arabia made a special deal to sell their petroleum, their oil in US dollar. And in that way the US dollar wasn't backed anymore by gold, but it was backed by black gold, petroleum, oil. And so in that way the US dollar had great value because oil, petroleum is energy that the whole world uses. Okay? And for that favor, in return, the U.S. sold a lot of weapons in order for the Saudi royal family to be in power. They wanted to, they propped up that regime, they protected that regime in order for that regime to be enormously rich and powerful. So they had like a mutual relationship. The Saudi royal family and the U.S. were one block. And extended to the Saudi was the Emirates and, you know, like OPEC. So OPEC made a deal with America to sell their oil in US dollar. They that was a deal. So now the US was in a huge, I mean, a perfect position because if you were a country like Japan or Europe or a European country and you needed to buy oil, you couldn't buy it with your own currency. You can't buy it with yen or with you know, other sterling, or you can't buy it with those currencies. You have to buy it in US dollar. So all the countries in the world were forced to obtain to get US dollars. But how can you get US dollars? Well, you can get US dollars by selling products to America, to the US. So that's how America became the consumer, the biggest consuming country in the world. Like every country, Japan, China, every country was forced to sell their product to America. And for selling their products to America, what they got in return was US dollars. And with these US dollars, the excess that they had, they could buy petroleum. So America was just in a position of just printing US dollar, just printing it, and they could just buy everything for free. And that's not a joke. They could just print money, print papers, just like they were just like in heaven. They could just print papers, buy products for free, and people would use those US dollars to buy petroleum from the OPEC countries. You understand? So all those countries, they bought oil, petroleum from the US. And then the OPEC countries had all these dollars, and what did they do with these dollars? They invested back in America, because America was a very stable country at those days. So they invested in government bonds, in stocks, American stock, in you know, how to call it, you know, in houses. They invested in America. So in that way, the U.S. was able to go into huge debt. The government of the U.S. could get into huge debt. The reason why they could get into huge debt is because they know that everyone is going to bail them out. I mean, they could print money as much as they wanted. They could borrow as much as they wanted, because they know that the OPEC country, Saudi Arabia, is going to buy all their debt. Is going to invest in their bonds, invest in their country. No matter what, they're going to invest. So they were able to go into huge debt year after year after year. Now, that's not the whole part of the story. Second part of the story is the World Bank. Now, the World Bank is you know, it gets its money from from the countries that are taking part in the World Bank. But like the biggest percentage of the money that it gets is from the U.S. So actually, the World Bank is a U.S. bank. It's not really a World Bank. It's the U.S. bank, and the director of the World Bank is has always been an American citizen. So the World Bank lends money to third world countries. Okay, third world countries also need the dollar to buy petroleum, but they are poor because they were exploited in the past by colonialism. But the World Bank and the IMF, what they do is they promise poor countries to alleviate their poverty. Okay, they say, oh, we will decrease illiteracy, we will decrease infant mortality, we will decrease you know all those negative things, and we will make your country better. We will make, for example, India better. Okay, or you know just let's take India. Okay, but so we are going to give you loans. We're going to give you loans in order for you to be better. Okay, so it all sounds good. Oh, they want to help. They want to help those poor countries by giving them money so they can build up their economy. But that's not what happens. The World Bank is just the worst thing in ever existed, because the World Bank is just nothing more but an instrument of exploitation. It's just economic uh, imperialism. So what happens is that the World Bank lends money to those poor countries with huge interest. That's the point. So the U.S. that's like the U.S. Recycling, the U.S. Petrodollar Recycling system. So the OPEC gets all those dollars, invests in the U.S., and the U.S. takes all those dollars that it gets from the OPEC, from all the from the OPEC, and these dollars they lend it to third world countries with interest. The third world countries can't pay their debt because it's a huge interest, and so then that's where the world that's when the IMF comes into play. But because the IMF, what it does is that it says, oh, you can't pay your debt. Okay, we will help you to pay your debt. We will give you advice how to pay your debt. So what you need to do is you need to do austerity measures. You need to cut back on social security. You need to cut back on healthcare. You need to cut back on all these social programs, which means that the poor of those poor countries get even poorer, because the benefits that they had, they all get all taken away by the IMF in order to repay their debt. They repay their huge loans, the huge interest. Okay, so the whole country gets sucked dry by the World Bank, by the IMF, by the US. Not only that, the IMF says, okay, in order to repay your debt, what you have to do is to privatize your oil industry, privatize your water industry, privatize your transportation, privatize everything. Because if you privatize, you can make more profit, and you can repay the debt, or you will alleviate your debt if you do that. Now, what it basically means is they are forcing those poor countries to sell their resources for free. That's what they are doing. So then that's when Shell and big oil companies come into the country, because now the oil industry is privatized, and those companies, they just come in, just take all the resources for free, almost for free, and they make a huge profit out of it. Those companies even start to sell the water to the people. I mean, in the past the water was free, but now they are even selling the water to the people. It's not. I mean, it's just crazy. So that's petrodollar recycling. That's how it works. That's not the whole story. I mean, sometimes in those third world countries you have like good leaders, like Iran, for example. Like in Iran, you had that problem. You had a leader, you had a president who said no to the World Bank. Who said, no, I don't want to take loans. I want to nationalize the oil industry. I want to nationalize I want to nationalize all those companies. I don't want private businesses coming over and taking everything. Okay? So those leaders like Mossadegh in Iran were hugely popular by the population because they gave back the wealth to the people. Okay? But oil companies like BP didn't want that. They want to suck everything dry. So what does the US do? When the US notices that a particular country doesn't want to follow in line, then they send the CIA. The CIA, what does the CIA do? Well, first they have like several tricks. Like the first trick they have is to try to overthrow the government. They try to overthrow the government by giving money and weapons to the people that don't like the government, like people that dissent. They give them money and weapons in order to rebel against the leader. Okay? If that doesn't work, they try to assassinate the leader. If that doesn't work, they go into war. So it's not a matter of choice. Those poor countries, they have to take the money from the World Bank. They have to go into huge debt. They have to. It's just imperialism. They don't have a choice. It's not a choice. Okay? So what happens is that the US installs puppet governments that that are dictators and they're just fucking monsters like Pinochet, Allende, Saddam Hussein. He was created by the US. The Shah of Iran in the past. I mean, like all the fucking dictators, all the like the horrific dictators, they were all created by the US, by the CIA, because those dictators, they were good for business because they kept their population in control, and they were supported by the US government by giving them weapons, by giving them money, because the money of the World Bank goes to the governments, goes to the corrupt governments, and those corrupt governments, they take the money, take the power, and in return they give access to the resources of the country. So the resources get sucked dry, and the governments, the corrupt dictators, they got propped up and they get all the power. Just like Mubarak in Egypt. He was created by the US. The people hated him, but the US supported him because he took money from the World Bank, and he I mean that's just like the ABC of the American policy. Okay, this was it. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you later. Bye.